Hello and welcome to All Indians Matter. I am Ashraf Engineer. As India struggles to feed its population, there is justifiably great focus on increasing farm yields. What's not talked about as much is the gargantuan amount of food loss due to fragmented systems and inefficient supply chains. According to the Food and Agricultural Organization, nearly 40% of the food India produces is wasted even before it reaches the consumer. This was never more stark than during the COVID 19 pandemic, which not only laid bare the problems of food waste but also compounded them. During the lockdown in 2020, surplus grain stocks, estimated at 65 lakh tons in the first 4 months of 2020, rotted in godowns. Access to food became scarce, especially for those at the bottom of the pyramid. India is said to have more than 200 million people who are food insecure and is home to the largest number of hungry people in the world. What can India and you and I as individuals do to reduce food loss? The World Resources Institute India has put together a working paper titled Food Loss and Waste in India: The Knowns and the Unknowns, that offers some interesting solutions.
All Indians matter.
We have on the show two experts. First, Shweta Lamba, project associate with the Sustainable Landscapes and Restoration team at World Resources Institute India, or WRI India. Her work focuses on research on food loss and waste. Prior to joining WRI India, Shweta worked in the field of sustainable agriculture and natural resource management. She has undertaken several research assignments across India, including monitoring and evaluation, impact evaluation, and project design. Welcome, Shweta.
Hi, Ashraf. Good to be here.
Next, Shaurabh Anand, Senior Project Associate with the Sustainable Landscapes and Restoration team at WRI India. His work too focuses on research related to food loss and waste. Prior to joining WRI India, Shaurabh worked with corporations, research institutions, and NGOs in the areas of natural resource and environmental management. Shaurabh holds a PhD in natural sciences and engineering and a master's degree in natural resources management. Shaurabh is particularly interested in carrying out research in the areas of human-environment interactions. Welcome, Shaurabh.
Hello, Ashraf. Happy to be here.
Shweta and Shaurabh, what is food loss and what is food waste? Why is it important to distinguish between these two? Shaurabh, why don't you go first? Shweta, you can go next.
So, food loss and waste are two related but different terms. And when you imagine a full value chain, you can imagine it from the farmer, that is producer, to the consumer. So the food loss a bit of this two terms applies from producer till the retailer, but not including retailer. So anything that is covered from the production till the time it reaches the retail, it is covered as food loss. From retail to the consumption part of the end, anything that go waste is known as food waste. The technical definition of it also differ a bit depending on what kind of factors are involved in it. So food loss is basically decrease in quantity and quality of the food that could result from the decision of food supplier, and it does not include retail, service provider, and consumer. Food loss typically take place during production, storage, processing, and distribution stage, and it's often known as unintended consequences of agricultural processes. While coming to the food waste is the decrease in quantity and quality of the food that results from the decision of a retailer, service provider, and consumer. I would request Shweta to explain why it is important to make a distinction between these two.
Sure. So, like Shaurabh explained, food loss and waste do talk about the same thing, like, for example, decrease in quantity and quality, but they happen at different points of the supply chain. So, why is it important to differentiate between them is very important again, because the causes and solution differ. For example, food loss is anything that happens before retailer or consumer, like Shaurabh said. So anything that gets damaged because of transport. For example, food moving around along the transportation gets damaged due to rocky roads. So that loss was unintended, but it happened due to poor infrastructure. So the causes and solution for food loss will be totally different, while causes and solutions for food waste will be very different, because food waste happens on the retailer and consumer level. So the stakeholders differ. For example, the producer can control the losses, while the consumer is blamed for the wastage, like the food waste that happens. So the causes and solution differ for these problems. So there is a need to look at them differently so that they can be tackled more accurately.
Yeah, I think these are critical points. So, Shweta, which brings me to my next question. What is the extent of post harvest food loss in India?
Yes. So food loss is often said to be post harvest loss as well in studies because it happens after harvest. So the extent differs. There is a lot of debate on what is the right way to measure it. But as per our studies, like as per the latest study that we have, as per the 2014 ICAR CFET study, which says that an estimated annual value of loss is about 92,651 crore rupees, which is approximately like 15.19 billion US dollars. And this does not account food waste. This is only food loss, which happens till the retailer level. So this represents a significant loss of national wealth, as you can see. But there is a lot of debate on, the ICS-CFIT study does not include all the stages of the supply chain. It does not include the qualitative losses, while it only includes quantitative losses. So it can often be said that it's underestimated value, but this is what we have as of data.
And that's a significant number, like you said. Shaurabh, in 2021, India ranked 101 out of 117 countries on the Global Hunger Index. Could you describe the role food loss plays in this?
Thank you for this very important question. So, hunger is a very important issue for our country. And like you mentioned in the beginning, close to 14% of our population, which amounts to 190 million people, are undernourished. So, there are several factors that contributes to this level of undernourishment. And these factors include, for example, lack of access to food, faulty distribution, poverty, conflict, or increase in population, and food loss and waste. Out of these factors, reducing food loss and waste can be instrumental in extending the net of food security to larger population. A key challenge that we see in Indian agriculture currently is to feed its growing population. While the agricultural production has kept pace with our growing population, we still do not have food available to everyone within our country. And this is a bit contrasting situation that despite having very high production of food within our country, for example, we are the largest producer of milk, we are second largest producer of fruits and vegetables, we still have the instances of hunger and undernourishment. One of the major causes for this is that not all food that is produced is consumed. Approximately 40% of the food that is produced is either get lost or wasted at different stages in value chain. And if you talk about food waste at household level, on an average, we waste around 50 kg of the food per household per year. And this adds to post-harvest loss that Shweta mentioned in the previous answer. So combining the impact of both food loss and waste, a lot of food get wasted before it can even reach to the people who need it most. And reducing food loss and waste can be an instrumental factor and can play a very key role in reducing the undernourishment and hunger that we have.
Absolutely. I think a lot of debate in recent years has been about the whole food supply chain, and we'll come back to that, of course. But in the meantime, Shweta, could you detail the social impact of food loss in India? And what I mean by that is, does it affect certain sections of the population more, women, lower castes, etc.?
Yeah, sure. So, generally speaking, like, for example, even lockdown, even climatic factors like heat wave currently, they affect differently to different people, right? So women get more affected sometimes, and especially women of marginalized communities get more affected. And why is that? So, for example, during the heat wave as well, so people who are better off, they can look for some alternatives, while these people who are, for example, hand to mouth, they do not have other alternatives or resources for other alternatives. So for in terms of food loss and waste, what happens is, so for example, there's high food loss across the supply chain. What happens then? It leads to supply shortages. And if there is supply shortages, then what happens? It leads to higher prices of whatever supply is available. So when the prices rise for these food, the marginalized community is not able to afford it. And when they cannot afford it, they cannot access it. So it directly leads to them not being able to access, nutritional food, or be it any food So it leads to a question of, accessibility and affordability when there's higher food loss or wastage across the supply chain.
I think that's a critical point, Shweta. In fact, you mentioned high inflation, and it's something that India is going through as we record this. So, I mean, I'm sure the impact is extremely high, more than what has been reflected in the numbers that we have access to so far. But Shweta, India has committed to the United Nations' Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs as they are better known, which calls for reducing food loss and halving food waste by 2030. How is India progressing on that front?
Okay, so this SDG 12.3, like you said, it basically talks about halving the food waste and also reducing the post harvest losses or food losses, like you say. So, starting with the good news, India is one of the few countries to have conducted two national surveys. One was back in 2005 and one was in 2013-14, led by the ICAR, to estimate the post-harvest losses of selected crops. This is a good news that we are having a surveys around, but uh, despite the efforts on measuring, on SDG 12.3, India only reports on post-harvest storage and distribution losses of central and state pool stocks, and that too just for wheat and rice. We are only reporting for wheat and rice, that too just for central and state pools. And on the second indicator, we are just doing availability of per capita food. So there's no indicator on directly measuring all the post-harvest losses on the crops or measuring wastage. So there are no studies examining the relationship between food loss and waste and SDGs. Food loss and waste potentially has wider implication for achieving other SDGs as well, but these links remain unexplored Indian context.
Right. Shaurabh, WRI is India's working paper, Food Loss and Waste in India, the Knowns and the Unknowns, says data on food loss is scarce, something that Shweta just referred to. And this is affecting how the problem is tackled. Could you say why data is critical in this context?
Sure. So, this problem of food loss and waste is so complex that only clear data can save us and can help us formulating any intervention. And currently, like Shweta mentioned, lack of robust data is a major hindrance toward making any policies or designing on-ground intervention. To begin with, if you talk about food loss, which is also known as post-harvest loss, there is no standard matrix or measurement unit to measure the post-harvest losses within our country. Different studies employ different matrices, which make it very difficult to compare across studies, across time period, and also across geographies. That has been a major problem highlighted within our working paper also. The data with respect to food loss in a standardized format is important to kind of identify the critical loss points that we have across our value chain. So critical loss points are basically the point which suffer most losses across value chain. And only through data we'll be able to identify that so that we take actions at stages which are most appropriate and most impactful. Coming back to the food waste, there is an absolute lack of data regarding food waste in India. The most recent released UN Waste Index report of 2021 only mentioned 3 Indian studies. So the entire index for the countries has been calculated based on 3 studies. And we absolutely have no information about socio-economic, geographical, or behavioral driver of the food waste that happens across different stages. For example, at household, retail, or service provider. So in summary, what we can say that our approach to deal with this problem must be data informed. And since there is such a lack of data, it is hindering our effort in formulating where to intervene and how to intervene.
Yeah, I think, and I want to stick with this, this point on data, Shaurabh. As I was reading the report, I came across an interesting term, gender disaggregated data on food loss. So could you explain, first of all, what that is and why it is important?
Sure. So within the context of food loss and waste, that is topic of our conversation, why it is important to have data that is disaggregated according to gender. So let us first talk about food loss that happens within the agricultural production domain. And here I would like to mention that it is important to acknowledge and recognize the role that is being played by women in Indian agriculture. Women are involved in all stages of agriculture, but particularly their involvement in post-harvest activities are very prominent. If you talk about rural areas, 80% of all economic active women are employed in agriculture and allied sector. On a national level, close to 12% of our total land holding are owned by women. However, the size of the total land holding for women is slightly less than that of men. However, when we talk about data on the food loss, we always talk about a combined data, and we do not know how the losses differ between women farmer and men farmer. And since the nature of agriculture for women farmer and men farmer are different, we need to know how these losses and all the causes that create that losses differ between them. And just to elaborate on how these, why it is important to know about disaggregated data according to gender, that our intervention must also take into account the actors that are involved in it. For example, any talk about technology improvement in post-harvest operation must take into account that most of these activities are carried out by women. So we need to consider the gender aspect in our conversation, and we also policymaker need to take into account that the difference exists. Also, having a gender approach will help us kind of achieve many other sustainable development goal and commitments that we have made at national and international level. So for these reasons, it's important to have a like broader outlook. We also need to look at these issues from a gender lens.
Absolutely. And Shweta, does the working paper identify any geographies as food loss hotspots?
No, actually, so the working paper looks into identifying the hotspots, but the literature that's available, it's not comparable. So there are not common definitions and framework used in different studies. So it's very difficult to say, which geography is the hotspot. However, the working paper highlights and proposes the need for identifying the magnitude and food loss hotspots to further reduce losses, but it does not per se identify.
Right. Would it be accurate to assume that states with poorer infrastructure would suffer greater food loss? I mean, is a logical way of looking at it?
Yes, actually, there's a very common saying as well that food loss is a developing country problem, while food waste is a developed country problem. So it works the same way for states as well.
Right, right. Shaurabh, what can be done at a policy level to reduce food loss?
So policy level interventions can drive large scale changes and systemic changes that can help solve the problem of food loss and waste. And when we talk about policy, it is important to kind of pinpoint here is that agriculture is a state subject in India. So we need to have a better and great coordination between both federal government as well as state government. And there is a need for commitment at the state level. Appropriate policies can provide a lot of support, financial incentive, and can also create infrastructure that can lead to reduction in food loss and waste. Just to give you a few examples in this regard, for example, policies can focus on developing better supply chain, and they can provide financial incentive to farmer to adopt better post-harvest practices so that losses are reduced. Policy level push is also required to bring about large infrastructure for food processing so that excess produce get utilized in a meaningful way. And lastly, we also need a policy push on research that aims for better measurement of the food loss and identification of drivers. So in the previous questions, we talk about lack of data, and this lack of data in some way could be minimized or solved if there is a systematic push on research. So the role of policies is very intensive. It's very wide. These are some of the pointers that we can start to think about.
And Shaurabh, one of the solutions the paper suggests is a multi-stakeholder coalition. Could you detail what that means?
So this problem of food loss and waste is so complex that it cannot be solved by one organization or one entity alone. There are different organizations within our country that are working to solve various problems across the value chain. For example, some are working to better post-harvest practices, some are working in transportation, some are working in food preservation. So what we realized during our working paper preparation is that there are a number of organizations, and some of them might not be even aware about the work being done by the others. And if we have to solve this problem, there is a need for collaborative action. So with this aim in mind, last year we launched a multi-stakeholder coalition, which is known as Friends of Champion 12.3 India Network, which aim to provide a collaborative platform for all organizations that are working toward food loss and waste. So we derived this name from Sustainable Development Goal 12.3, which aims to reduce food loss and half the food waste within our country. Our aim is to bring together the actors and different stakeholders that are working in this domain so that each of us can learn from our experience, and also how can we better communicate our result and make a linkage that has an overall impact on the entire value system. So this is the aim of our multi-stakeholder coalition that we aim to achieve through this network.
Right. And Shweta, could you detail the link between food loss and environmental impact?
Yeah, so there's a important linkage between food loss and environment. So research suggests that, if food loss and waste were its own country, it would be the third largest greenhouse gas emitter. Has a big footprint, we can say. So food loss and waste both have an environmental impact. In fact, food waste leads to a greater impact, I believe. So let's see how it impacts. So all the resources that go into the production of food, for example, water, fertilizer, pesticide, hours of labor, energy, soil, everything. So whenever we waste a food, all the resources that went into it gets wasted as well, right? And it goes without saying that, the later food is wasted along the value chain, the greater its environmental impact, because then we also have to take into consideration of the energy and natural resources used in processing, transporting, storing, cooking. All the resources keep on adding as we go in the supply chain. Also, there's this another interesting thing. So what happens when the loss happens? What is the destination of the loss? So there are several different destinations for loss, like some convert it to manure, some compost it, while majority of food lost goes to landfill. And when the food is discarded, it goes to the landfills where it rots to produce methane. Methane, a greenhouse gas that is like 28 times much potent than carbon dioxide. So it has a lot of environmental impact, but in different ways, as we can see.
Right. Shweta, what's lacking in our food supply chain and delivery systems, and what's the solution?
So there's no one size fits all solution, because losses vary from crop to crop and also from geography to geography. Like you said, will the states underdeveloped have more losses? So yes, that's true. So the losses will vary in different geography depending on the problem that have. For example, a solution in Himachal would not work in Madhya Pradesh because they have a different landscape. But there are some solutions that work all through, but needs to just accommodate to the geography. For example, improvement in infrastructure, improvement in transport facilities, improvement in storage, cold chain. So cold chain is basically when we harvest, we keep in a cold storage, and then we move in a cold transport, and then we also use a cold distributor where it's kept in cool temperature and not ambient temperature. So these are some interventions that help. Also, research and development interventions are needed for, to understand what else can be done to reduce the losses. Then creating market linkages, because to avoid a situation like glut situation. And then the important thing which has already been discussed, which is data. So if we have demand and supply data with us, we can match it and, avoid all the losses and direct these extra production that we have to different sources and have economic returns. So yes.
Shaurabh, let's talk about individual responsibility. What can we as individuals do to reduce food loss and also, of course, food waste?
Sure. Thank you for this very important question. And I think it is responsibility for all of us to think about this issue and also our action to reduce this. So before answering this question, I would like to extend the scope a bit and talk about both food loss and waste. What we can do to reduce food loss to begin with. As a producer of food, one need to be aware about the concept of loss that extend beyond economic loss. So for a lot of farmer, the loss just correlate with economic loss. So if they can get out their input from the produce, they do not care about the food that is getting lost. So we need to kind of educate them about this concept of loss that goes beyond economic loss. There is a need for value chain thinking, which means that one must be aware about whatever you do at one stage of value chain affect the produce all along. So for example, if you do something during harvest, so the storage, transport, consumption, everything gets affected by that. And we often think about keeping our table clear, but we don't think about the impact of our action further down the line. So there's a need for that. We can do a lot of things to reduce the food waste because most of it correlates to our consumption and purchase behavior. And as a consumer of food, one must be aware about and mindful about his or her purchasing and consumption behavior. Here, I would like to list out few things that we can practice on our daily life to reduce food waste within our household or wherever we consume food. And to begin with, we should not indulge in excessive purchase and stocking of food. We often go to supermarket and see food material with discounted rate or large packaging size and end up buying that. What happens later that we often don't consume that food and a lot of it goes waste either due to poor storage consumption or we don't consume it at all. And we need to kind of keep a watch on small amount of food that we keep throwing in the waste bin because even the small amount can aggregate to a large sum over the year.
Absolutely. I think one of you mentioned that it's food wastage per household is 50 kg a year.
That is true. Yes. Yeah. And there is a tendency to kind of discard vegetable which do not meet certain shape and size requirement. So these food, which are kind of termed within quote as ugly food, I would like to say that they have the same nutritional composition as good looking food, for example, bigger, better, without blemishes. So one should avoid regarding discarding food that is not meeting certain specification according to our requirement. There is a need to be mindful of what we are ordering when we are eating out so that we can avoid plate waste. If you are having any social gathering, there is a need to be better prepared about our food planning. So according to different studies, it has been estimated that 10 to 20% of the food during wedding just goes waste. So if you are having any social event that involve large food preparation, there are a lot of NGOs that work in food distribution area. So I would suggest everyone to keep a track of food preparation, get in touch with NGOs which are doing this food distribution, provided, that food is healthy and okay to be eaten. The most important thing that we can do to avoid food waste is to create an awareness about this issue. We often throw food, but we do not think about the environmental impact, economic impact, or social impact that it might have. So within our community, we can talk about this issue. We can nudge people to think about their consumption behavior, their purchase behavior. And like Shweta mentioned about all the environmental impact, we can also talk about these impacts that food waste create. And in the end, I would like to say that we often do a lot of things keeping our convenience in mind. For example, we don't want to eat certain kind of food. We don't want to think about food distribution because it's messy and it involves a lot of work. However, you should keep in mind that what is convenient for you might be highly inconvenient for the planet, considering the impact that it has all along.
I think, Shaurabh, these are critical points, and I cannot stress enough to listeners that they should adopt them. Consume wisely, waste less, create more awareness. All very, very good points. Shaurabh, why did WRI India decide to put together a working paper on food loss?
Okay. So WRI as a global organization has been doing some really exciting work in reducing food loss and waste. Our program with respect to food loss and waste is slightly newer as compared to program in other countries. And so if you see, there is a talk of sustainable food system all across the world with respect to nutrition and food security. And reducing food loss and waste kind of emerged as one of the critical things that we should focus on if we want to have a sustainable food system. So this working paper developed by WRI India was an attempt to take the stock of situation within our country. So it is important to know the ground realities, what are the actors involved, what are the most important areas that we need to focus before kind of intervening in this field. So with these goals in mind, WRI India came across the working paper, and that working paper kind of highlighted, like the title says, knows and unknown. So now we know what we know about food waste. Now we also know what we don't know about food loss and waste. And this paper has been instrumental in shaping our work towards reducing food loss and waste in India.
So Shweta and Shaurabh, here's a question I ask all my guests at the end of the conversation. Why do you do this work? Shweta, why don't you go first? Shaurabh, you can go next.
Why do I do this work? Okay, I come from Haryana. I have a bit of agriculture in my genes, I would say. My family is from an agriculture background. So I always have been interested in food per se. And second, I think food loss and waste is very under researched in India. And as we read more, we understand how it can solve multiple problems from environment to improving livelihood to all across the stakeholders in the supply chain. So it's a win win kind of a problem that we're working on. So it's very exciting.
Shaurabh?
So, like Shweta said, this is a problem that has impact in multiple dimension. For example, environment, economic, social, and this is a complex problem. In order to solve it, you need to think about multiple dimensions at the same time. You need to think about economics. You also need to think about society, environment. So this is a problem which is situated at the intersection of different areas or different domains. And also, I have been kind of interested in issues that result due to interaction between human actions and environment. So essentially, this thing about the interaction, that what we do and what we don't do kind of affects some of the environmental problems that we see. It led me to work on this project. And also, WRI or WRI India in general is kind of pioneer in this domain. And we get to learn so much just by being in this field and working on this topic.
Shweta and Shaurabh, it's a mammoth task to feed India, especially given its poverty and social structures. Reducing food loss and waste would go a long way in achieving that goal. Thank you for detailing that for us.
It was great chatting with you, and it was a very good discussion. Also, would like to highlight a small thing which already Shaurabh had emphasized on. So, everybody is a consumer, while not everybody is a producer, and food waste is a problem of a consumer. So, why not? It can start with whoever is listening, and we can solve this problem together.
Thank you very much, Ashraf, for having us here today. It was really exciting conversation, and I hope that some of our messages reach to wider audience and we start thinking about the problem that we're facing today. Thanks for having us.
Thank you all for listening. Please visit allindiansmatter.in, that's ALLINDIANSMATTER.in for more columns and audio podcasts. You can follow me on Twitter at Ashraf Engineer, that's ASHRAFENGINER, and All Indians Count, that's ALLINDIANSCOUNT. Search for the All Indians Matter page on Facebook. On Instagram, the handle is All Indians Matter. Email me at editor@allindiansmatter.in. Catch you again soon.